Welcome to episode 82 of the Breaking Balls podcast. We're post-Darlington edition, and two major streaks in NASCAR just got snapped. Brad Keselowski and Ford are in victory lane, and it sounds like William Byron might have taken out two Blaneys this week.
Yep, Bob, always fun to be at Darlington. Throwback weekend, so we got some great schemes on the track, and one of the greatest quotes of the year off the track. It's not our fault, but it is our problem. Sounds a lot like Breaking Balls.
Flags in the air. Boogity, boogity, boogity. Let's go racing, boys.
Well, Bob, another week, another sweaty forehead of mine, because this one had action from the very beginning of the race to the very end of the race. I mean, what a great 2 weeks to be a NASCAR fan coming off of Darlington this week, Bob.
Oh, baby, we are eating folks here in the NASCAR fandom. Of course, if you're new here to Breaking Balls, if you're somehow coming across us, like, subscribe. We are covering NASCAR all the time here. And let me tell you, Ad, the content here has been thriving lately because not only was this week good at Darlington, but it just seems like this is what has been kind of trending up in the 2024 season. We had a little bit of a lull with some of the races last month, but the month of May is just really off to a hot start. You've got Brad Keselowski, like I said, breaking his big streak. What did they say on the broadcast? 4 or 5 times in a row he's finished second. We've been waiting for him to finally get into victory lane. And the way he did it, Ad, it's not even really like the biggest story of the race today. It's crazy. We've been waiting for it, but we're still not even talking about it.
I was going to say the broadcast said it best. 5 times a bridesmaid previously before finally getting into victory lane this week. I mean, it's kind of crazy because you would think that this would be the biggest story in the world because, you know, I think everybody's been waiting for this as far as NASCAR fandom goes. For when is Brad Keselowski going to get back into victory lane? And it finally happens, and it feels like we just have so much more to talk about. It's a very weird feeling.
Well, if you've been listening to this podcast, we've been chomping at the bits waiting to celebrate this. And the way it's happened over the years, Chris Buescher has kind of been the guy. Brad Keselowski is kind of given up the seat and let Chris Buescher take in the wins the last few years at RFK. He's been the one that's winning in the resurgence, but hasn't been because Brad hasn't been close. He's just always pushing him to the lead, it feels like. He's always second to Buescher. And for once, Chris Buescher finally had to take one for the team. And, I mean, physically took one for the team. I mean, he goes and confronts Tyler Reddick after the race, but I guess we could start in reverse here, Tarantino style, you call it. 33 laps to go. We re-racked the field, and we've got 3 cars in the lead. Tyler Reddick, Brad Keselowski, and Chris Buescher. Take it from here, my friend.
I mean, it was hold on to your butts racing from 33 to go. I mean, it just seemed like all 3 guys knew they had a very good chance to win. All 3 of them obviously, you know, showed all day there was speed enough for them to win. I think, you know, Tyler Reddick, obviously, watching stage 2, I thought there was I watched this race with my uncle I very rarely get to, and I turned to him and I said, man, it does not seem like anybody is going to be able to really get a hold of that 45 car, but he even said, he goes, I don't know. He goes, Brad's been hanging around long enough. You never know. And the more, it just kept, like I said, from start to finish, Bob, this race was magnificent. And then just, I think what's happened in the past in NASCAR is, like, I think I mentioned this last week, but it feels like we end up with these anticlimactic finishes, and, you know, it builds and builds and the tension's there all race. And then all of a sudden it just kind of drops out from under you. But not today, because Christopher Buescher drove through the advertisements to make a pass at one point. I mean, it was some of the best racing I've seen all year. I mean, I don't like it. It's so crazy because I'm just trying to even digest it right now. It is absolutely nuts. I at no point I anticipated what happened. I'll say that much.
Well, you're waiting on Keselowski to run down Tyler Reddick, and he's on his bumper. He's getting close. They finally are side by side for a second or two there. And Buescher pushes Keselowski, finally gives him the push that Keselowski given him all these years. And then finally, after a while, Buescher just goes right by him, like you said, sends it down on the inside on the front stretch, goes around both of them. You think, oh my God, again, Chris Buescher's going to use Brad Keselowski to win at RFK, and Brad's going to be the bridesmaid. But then Tyler Reddick gets back into second, runs down Buescher, and, with 10 to go, I'm not upset at this. Chris Buescher is going to be upset, and we can talk about the reasons why. It's very valid, but you're racing for the lead. You're racing for the win there with 10 to go. And Reddick has seen what Brad Keselowski has struggled to do for the last 20 to 30 laps, struggle to get a pass for the lead. You can get side by side, but you can't get around. You can't be clear. And Reddick said, you know what? I'm not going to wait around. I'm going to send it here. I've already won a race. I'm secure in the playoffs. We're going for more. We're going for the trophy. I respect it. You can't hate it as a race car fan, honestly. It's going for the win there, but lo and behold, he takes out Buescher. They both go into the wall. They both take out each other. Slowly but surely, Brad Keselowski finds a way to sneak by both of them and cruises his way to victory lane. Honestly, though, it's 110 races in the making there. You have to be lucky, but to be lucky, sometimes you have to put yourself in position. And like we said, Brad Keselowski has been the bridesmaid 4 to 5 times at least. He was due one here. You love to see it.
I agree. It's so funny because what just crossed my mind is this literally had the same plot as the promotional races that they do at sporting events, where like they have the 3 colors racing and going from one to thing, and the 2 leaders take each other out, and then the next thing you know, the 3rd place guy comes and wins the race. And the amount of times that something like this has happened to Brad Keselowski, I've never looked at a situation with, like you said, the Reddick and Buescher thing. I mean, like you said, I get it. I think Tyler Reddick obviously regrets making the move, and that much was, he kind of made that clear in the post race. But at the end of the day, it is a move that you do have to make, because otherwise, what are you doing? I mean, you race to win, and that's a move you make to win the race, and I respect it. Obviously, I think he wishes it went a little bit differently, for how, Chris Buescher kind of came up on the short end of the stick. But like I said, it is just one of these things to where karma felt very real today, because Tyler Reddick often, you've seen him make moves like that and make it stick a million different times, and for whatever reason today, it just wasn't the day that didn't have it and it didn't stick, and Brad just kind of came out on the right side of it. And for somebody who has been so unlucky and so snake bitten since since he became a race owner and started to really build the culture at RFK, it just felt like finally the good guys won one a little bit. It just felt like, it feels like, regardless of who you were a fan of, Brad Keselowski, he deserved this one. And it felt, even with the conflict, even with all of it, it just feels like, like I said, it just feels like the right thing happened. And that's a very weird thing to say when one car takes another one out.
Yeah, well, let's rewind before we talk about Brad and the story, though, because the big story here is the confrontation on pit road, where let's go back to the clash with 10 to go. You got Buescher and Reddick side by side. Buescher and Reddick go into the wall. They end up taking each other out of contention for the win there. And then you've got Chris Buescher on pit road after the race, pretty steamed, and makes a beeline toward Tyler Reddick's car. And immediately pushes Reddick. Reddick still got his helmet on. Buescher's a bigger guy than Reddick, obviously. And Reddick tries to de-escalate the situation really, really quickly. Hey, man, I know I messed up. I effed up. I didn't want to wreck our cars. I don't care about my car. I'm sad that your car got wrecked. At the end of the day, I respect Tyler Reddick for being a man and taking it on the chin and say, look, I get it. I screwed up. And then you got Chris Buescher on the other side, Prosper, Texas' own, who is just absolutely steamed because, one, yeah, you've got a race that you just had an opportunity to win. 2 weeks in a row, you've been screwed. But more importantly, like he said to Tyler Reddick, you've got the sticker on your car. You're already in the playoffs. It's not like that for us. It means more for us. So I get it, Ad, but I'm curious, what do you think there? Is it fair? Is it foul? Is it just two guys racing for the win and everyone's upset?
I think it is definitely two guys racing for the win and everybody getting a little bit upset. I don't think the sticker on the car thing, I get it for Christopher Buescher, but obviously what does that mean for Tyler Reddick? I mean, at the end of the day, it's not like he can in that moment say, oh, well, I've won a race this year. He hasn't. I'm going to let him by. I just, unless it's a teammate, I don't see that happening. So I understand the point, and I understand, saying why it means more for Chris Buescher. But at the end of the day, if you're Tyler Reddick, he's a competitor, and you can't really take that into account. I think, Tyler Reddick explained it. He said, I tried to throw the move. I realized it wasn't going to work quickly, and then I tried to back out of it, and lo and behold, he just wasn't able to. And I guess you can make the argument that, all right, why make the move there if you're not certain it's going to work or da-da-da-da-da, but at the end of the day, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's two guys racing. Obviously, I think this sucks for Chris Buescher because he's got to take it on the chin 2 weeks in a row, and I think that plays a really big part into this because you're frustrated if this happens once in a season, and if it happens twice, spread out, it's very frustrating. But to have it happen 2 weeks in a row like this, I mean, you've got to just be steaming mad getting out of the car, which was evident. Obviously cooler heads prevail, and, Tyler Reddick, conflict avoidance has to be at least a 99 at this point for Tyler Reddick, because my man has gotten himself into a few things and has somehow not gotten himself punched in the face. So you got to give credit to Tyler Reddick for being able to talk his way out of the situation, because I thought we were going to see, as soon as that helmet came off, I thought we were seeing a right cross. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, no. I thought we were going to see some kind of confrontation besides that shove. I mean, it might not be Chris Buescher's fault, but it is certainly his problem. That is definitely true. Where, yeah, like you said, 2 weeks in a row, it's not more just how it happened. I think it's just the culmination of it all for Chris Buescher. And like I said, he doesn't have the sticker. It's guaranteeing that playoff bid there. It's a nice peace of mind there if he gets across the finish line. Where now he's still in a points battle. That midfield battle is a dogfight right now for someone like Chris Buescher, who sees his teammate finally getting victory lane, and it's a very contrasting emotion there, where Brad Keselowski is celebrating, and Chris Buescher wants to be the supporting teammate, but is going after a guy who has historically raced him very clean, and he even said so. Man, we've had no issues in the past. Today is when it starts. I think it's just 10 laps to go, and it's two guys who are very competitive guys racing for the win. Like you said, for Tyler Reddick, that win sticker doesn't matter in the moment. Yeah, you can look back and say, oh, well, it is what it is. But in the moment, Tyler Reddick doesn't care that he's won and Chris Buescher hasn't. Those guys are the most competitive people on the planet. And I think that Chris Buescher's going to look back and maybe not be disappointed how he handled it, but go back and say, okay, Tyler Reddick was right. It was a racing incident. It is what it is. But go ahead.
I don't know, man. It's one of those things that I wouldn't regret announcing that if I was Chris Buescher, because at the end of the day, you do have to say something. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things you do. I think the confrontation is definitely warranted, whether it's on purpose, accident, regardless of the history. You can't do nothing, because if you do nothing, it basically sends a message to the entire garage that you can use me up and I'm not going to do anything. So at the end of the day, you're right. I think there will certainly be a certain level of understanding that kind of comes with a little bit of time and as this wears off a little bit. But I do think it was the right move. You can't blame Buescher for going over there and doing something, or giving him a shove and making a point, a very public point of saying, look, I think at the end of the day, he'll probably fall somewhere along the lines of, I get it, I understand this was a racing incident, but don't expect to use me up and not hear about it. And that's what I think is the most important thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point, where you have to, especially in a day and age now in the garage where the respect is not really given on the track, you kind of have to make it known where you're going to be a hard ass like Ross Chastain out there, and you're going to be fighting for every position, whether it's first or 31st. So
let me ask you this,
a fair point.
It's kind of a funny thing, it's a funny example, but how many people have said anything to Austin Hill since he absolutely fucking decleated that dude last year? You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, it's one of those things to where, like you said, in the age where there's not a lot of respect in the racing on the track, I think it's kind of an every man for himself series at this point. And every man for himself sport as far as NASCAR upon the 3 Series. I just think it, message delivered is what I'll finish there.
You say Austin Hill. Look at Ross Chastain and Noah Gragson at Kansas last year. Nobody has gone up to Ross since that moment, and Noah Gragson certainly hasn't either. So, yeah, I guess that's a fair point. You got to stand up for yourself in this Cup Series garage. But a guy that is standing up on top of the car in victory lane, still probably currently, this is about an hour and a half after the race, Brad Keselowski, we talked about it at the beginning of this, but to go 110 races, to finally get that monkey off of his back, to be a part owner at RFK now, and to not only see the team winning, but himself winning now too, to leave an organization like Penske in that flagship number 2 team. He's won a championship there. it's a great story, and we've said multiple times we're waiting for this moment. You finally get it, and to pair it with this whole Ford fiasco where coming into today, you added 2 more races on the weekend. They were 0-32 to start 2024 in the NASCAR entire division. 2 streaks broken, and at Darlington, no less. What a way to do it, right?
Yeah, a Harambe-sized gorilla coming off of Ford and Brad Keselowski's back right now, dude. I mean, like I said, I alluded to it earlier, but it just felt nice to see Brad back in victory lane. You know, he has devoted just about everything in his life to making RFK work and making, and really going in and changing the culture and doing everything he could to basically make them ready to compete for championships and to compete for race wins on a weekly basis. And this finally feels like the culmination of it all. I can only imagine how he's feeling right now, because I thought the first question out of the car was, how does this feel as a co-owner to finally win your first race? And I think it was such a good question to ask, and I think for Brad, it's got to just feel incredible, because you've put everything into this. You've staked your reputation as a driver and as a business person in making RFK work. And it's one thing to see the other car. Chris Buescher's had success last year and won races, but to finally get it for himself after the quote earlier in the year of we're not here for second place finishes, and today it just finally felt like the instant validation of, no, you're not, Brad. You're not here to finish second. You're in victory lane. You've finally got the stuff. You've got everything built around you. And I don't know. Does this snowball into more success for RFK? I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's got to feel great just to at least have one under his belt to let him know that, hey, this is going in the right direction.
Especially, like you said, Chris Buescher's won the last 2 seasons, but the Bristol one in 2022. And then last year he had that back-to-back race, just kind of come out of nowhere party where he won 2 races, and you go, RFK is here to stay. Yeah, for Brad Keselowski to get that moment where, hey, we can do this too. It's not just Chris Buescher. We can do it too. I'm not just the guy that's going to push you. I can win. It's great to see, because not only that, you look at this top 10 and even the top 5, half of the top 10 was Fords. 3 of the top 5 were Fords. Kevin Harvick said this interesting thing on his podcast last week where apparently at Kansas, Ford brought some new engines to the track. And, Chris Buescher obviously ran P2 last week. You've had Noah Gragson come through with top 10s until this week. You've seen Stuart Haas kind of uptick a little bit in their performance. Even front row, you saw Todd Gilliland have really good speed in the first 2 stages. Even Justin Haley ran 8th for a while today, I'm just saying, Ford, for all this doomsday talk we've had, and this podcast has been on the same trend of it,
oh yeah,
they are trending in the right direction. And whether it's new horsepower in these engines or they've fiddled with some kind of aero, they are getting better. And we did the same thing last year where Ford hadn't won anything, and we look and they've swept the championship series. Maybe we have something similar to that, but I mean, man, the fact that we've seen the performance uptick the last 2 weeks now at oval tracks, that's got to be something encouraging for those blue ovals, right?
Absolutely. I think any sort of success, was going to do at any level, let alone Cup. I think having it come at the Cup level is big, just because I think it kind of really radiates all the way through all of the Ford programs. But yeah, I thought it was interesting, with the new engines, like you said, that Harvick brought up on his podcast. It's good to see that they aren't complacent. I think it really, I think I've said it a couple of times on this podcast. NASCAR is better when there's more, when more OEMs are successful and it's not just a Chevy versus Toyota battle. And to see Ford kind of come roaring back here and to have such a good day at one of NASCAR's premier tracks at Darlington, a place that has oftentimes, the best drivers win, because it's a track that takes a lot of skill to get around. And for them to do it here, to get a win at Darlington, where they say, look, we know we have the drivers to get this done. I mean, look, you got Josh Berry in 4th today. I think it's, or third, I believe. Sorry. I'm not 3rd or 4th. I'm not sure at this point. I'm just going to keep doing it. But I just think this is huge. This is so big for Ford as an OEM to just finally get going in the right direction. It just feels like there's really nowhere to go but up from here. Am I right?
Yeah, I would like to think so, because part of the going up is they were on the floor. The bar was on the ground. So every little uptick in performance is a trend up. I mean, they can't go any worse than what they've started. To go 0-32, and obviously there's been multiple photo finishes we've talked about. Ty Majeski was close to winning on Friday night in the Truck Series. It's not because they've just been completely off the pace, but the consistency hasn't been there, and especially from these flagship teams like Penske. Joey Logano's struggles have been well noted this year in the Cup Series. It's guys like that are usually a good barometer for success with the Ford flagship teams, and it hasn't been there. So for someone like Brad Keselowski and RFK to now back-to-back weeks to show really, really good speed at oval tracks that are really the bread and butter of NASCAR, as far as, you've got a little bit of a leg up on your competition, not these cookie cutter super speedways that Ford has, put together the last few years. Absolutely, I agree. It's got to be a trend in the right direction and something to be looking forward to. And like I said, we might be looking at Phoenix here in November and going, man, Ford just swept the weekend. How did that happen?
Yeah, and I think what's crazier for me is that, like you said, to have it be Brad Keselowski, I think, is also another little wrinkle to this, because it's not Joey Logano, it's not Ryan Blaney, it's not the last two Ford champions that got this first win. It's Brad Keselowski, and I think that is one of those things that it should give people confidence to the fact that, look, it's not just it's not just the big boys, it's not just the guys who have had success in the next gen era. They're finally seem to, I'm not sure what the adjustment was with the engine, but the speed finally seems to be there. Because the arrow always seemed like it was kind of there with with the super speedway stuff, but it just seems like they're finally headed in the right direction.
And this is just me putting a tinfoil hat on before we go to the next subject, but Ford, especially with their engine providers, what are their engine providers? Roush is one of their engine providers. So if anyone's going to see the uptick in success right away, it's going to be RFK. They are at the advantage of that. So the fact that RFK has seen that speed in 2 weeks in a row when they've brought new engines, I don't think that's really I don't think that's anything to kind of raise your nose about. I think that's probably something we can watch moving forward. If anyone's going to be the strong Ford team, it might be RFK moving forward, just because they're going to see the results in their engines quicker than you see it kind of trickle down through the Ford ladder. I don't know. That's something to watch, Ad. But you mentioned some Fords today. Joe Logano, Ryan Blaney, guys that you normally see in the Ford camp. Well, Brad Keselowski made it today in victory lane, because a lot of those great cars today got taken out around, what did we have? Lap 129. There was a restart today. And, Ryan Blaney's definitely, I think, been carrying the water for Ford. I think you and I can probably agree with that lately, at least to start 2024. But Ryan Blaney had a really good car to start. Kind of was working his way through the field. And then all calamity went loose, and you had a couple Fords get taken out. Chris Buescher was in there, by the way. He ended up getting out of it. But Martin Truex was caught up in that. Larson was slowed down, Ad. This whole calamity on 129 really kind of shuffled the field up, didn't it?
Yeah, William Byron seems to systematically be removing every single Blaney from his life, including Ryan on the racetrack at this point. So that kind of is a little awkward. It's one of those things where I've gone back and forth on this, because did you need to push it 3 wide there? No, probably not. But at the end of the day, it is racing. And, I guess it goes down to if you're going to make a move, you better make it stick. If you're, I think that's kind of where I land on it, to where it's like, I'm actually surprised that William Byron is not catching more heat for this, because it just felt kind of unnecessary to me. And, it wrecked a lot of really, really, you mentioned it. It wrecked a lot of very good cars' days. I mean, I don't know. I'm having a hard time kind of putting my finger on, how much blame to really put on William Byron, but it is kind of becoming this thing to where he's getting a little bit of that Kyle Larson reputation, to where is he wrecking you on purpose? No. But is he putting you in a really, really bad spot? Yes, absolutely. And I think that's something to kind of keep an eye on. I think that style doesn't make any friends, but at the end of the day, William Byron has been good enough. He's obviously got a bunch of wins this year. So I get why he's willing to take the risk because of his situation, but you're certainly not going to make any friends doing stuff like that.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, yeah, I've noticed that too, especially this year. This is, I think, either the third or fourth incident where he's kind of been pushing a little too hard and taking some good cars out. You think back to Daytona, obviously. I think of the Ross Chastain block where he was, I think, running P2 on Chase Elliott back in Texas. This race, there's a couple races last year. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where Kyle Larson's an aggressive driver and he gets caught in those things where he's either good enough to get out of it and win or he completely wrecks his day. And William Byron, I think that's a good point, Ad, where it's similar to that, where some days he's got the really fast car and thinks, I've got to make this move. And especially in today's NASCAR, where restarts are where you're going to get the most ground early on, you got to send it in there sometimes. Now, I agree with you. Was that the moment, not even halfway through the race in stage 2? Probably not. Especially when you've got Ryan Blaney, who, for off-the-track reasons, it sounds like William Byron has broken up with Ryan Blaney's sister, so that never goes well. And you've got this moment where Ryan Blaney, with a wrecked car, comes out of pit road and just beelines it toward William Byron behind the pace car. And that intrusive thought nearly won. And then he backs it off and comes away and goes back. But point taken for William Byron. You are not going to be getting a Christmas card from the Blaney household this year.
No, and I think if you follow the sport casually, you may not understand. Ryan Blaney is a very, very nice guy off the racetrack, but when he puts his helmet on, that guy is an absolute psychopath. So I'm not kidding. As I saw him make the beeline towards Byron, I thought there was a strong chance we were going to see a Matt Kenseth-like collision. You know what I mean?
You heard his radio, right?
Get pretty wild.
You heard his radio, right? He gave the O.J. Simpson call of, I'm going to kill those two motherfuckers. I mean, that is not something Ryan Blaney's a very hothead on the radio, but to say something like that, that's even uncharacteristic for him. So, yeah, I don't know if it was personal, if it was just more, I don't know. But again, William Byron, like you said, more incidents where it's kind of, happening with William Byron being aggressive, but I don't know what to say.
I'll say this, though. It's kind of like, when you're playing with house money, you're more likely to roll the dice, is what I'll say. And I think this may just be the same thing with, Kyle Larson, obviously. It's the most, it's very comparable because they're on the same team, that type of thing. But when you have multiple wins in a year, you've won stages, you've got some playoff points early in the year, you've got this cushion. I totally understand why he was willing to send it. I like we both said, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think that's kind of where I stand on this with this whole incident. Do I understand racing and, really wanting to, maybe improve your position? Yes. But just because you can halfway through the race does not mean you should.
Agreed. And you see Ryan Blaney end up paying the price for it. It may not be his problem, but or his you get the point. I won't even butcher. But Ryan Blaney finishes last in 36th there. You had Kyle Larson, who also wins stage 1 there, had a really fast car. He was also caught up in that. He got into the back of Bubba Wallace, and it wasn't like it completely derailed his day, but he just didn't have that speed that was dominant to start, where you thought, oh man, not only is this throwback scheme going to be the talk of the day, but it's literally going to be on TV all day. And it partially was, but he, in this late pit cycle in stage 3, where he's run, I think 6th or 7th with a decent car, but nothing like we came to expect, hits the wall. And then the day goes from bad to worse, spins again. And I mean, like you said with William Byron, he gets it from his mentor, I guess, maybe Kyle Larson.
Yeah, this one was interesting to me because, I think Kyle Larson, because he's just has so much talent, so much skill behind the wheel, he has taken a lot of good cars and made them great. I think today he had an okay car that he made pretty good. He was able, when he was running, before this incident, he was running kind of top 10. Really, like I said earlier about Darlington, if you've got, this is one of those tracks where driver skill is everything, so it's no surprise to see him running up there. But you're right. There just seemed to be something a little bit off all day as far as the car went. And then ultimately it culminated in the spin. I mean, what I will say, it was a hilarious thing that they were talking about going to listen to Kyle Larson's, the team radio, and then as soon as they cut to it, he spun. I thought, oh my gosh, the Fox curse is very real. But that, it's sad because that was such, like you said, the scheme was beautiful. I mean, the playoff of the Kellogg scheme, for them to put that back on the track and for all the great stuff they did with Terry Labonte, it was just a shame to see his day end like that.
Yeah, and I think we've come to expect that from Kyle Larson, where, I think it's 8 stage wins now, which he's absolutely blowing the field away, and he might win the NASCAR regular season just off of these stage points alone. But yeah, it feels like Kyle Larson's all in, or he's having an issue late that derails his day. The 5 team's biggest opponent on the NASCAR track is the 5 team. You think of a couple weeks ago when they had that wheel go loose at Richmond. They were the car to beat, and then that day completely went sideways from there. It just feels like for Kyle Larson, it is we've got the speed, but something weird happens, or we shoot ourselves in the foot. And another week where it was self-inflicted again. After, I know he got caught up in the Buescher-Reddick, but Buescher was able to keep it up. Larson just pushed too hard at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because if he's not racing Denny Hamlin for the win, he's just doing something to himself. It just feels like that's been the story of the NASCAR season. It's either Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin racing each other for a win, or Kyle Larson having something absurd happen to him on pit road, or that type of thing. It just seems to be the story of the season.
Which, by the way, I'm glad you mentioned Denny Hamlin, because we can transition to kind of these finishing results here, Ad. And you go to Darlington, and you're waiting to see Denny Hamlin racing for the lead there. And I'm looking through this top 10. Denny Hamlin finished 4th, but was never a factor really at all today for the race, when at a track where he's usually absolute nails and a competitor always. The fact that he ended up 4th here, I'm just kind of confused.
The most quiet 4th place finish maybe ever. I mean, because that's a pretty good day. I mean, for just about anybody else in the series, that's something that, you almost write home to Mom about and say, Mom, I'm sorry it wasn't a Mother's Day, but I got a 4th place finish at Darlington. And you just get the feeling for this 11 team that they're going to be disappointed because they just weren't necessarily in the mix all day. Obviously, Denny finds a way to get a result because, well, it's Denny Hamlin. It just seems to be what he does. But it was definitely not what we've come to expect out of the 11 team, because they've just been so dominant lately, but ultimately they got a result.
Yeah, 100%. And it was a good day for Denny Hamlin and his team. Bubba Wallace kind of quietly was in the mix all day today in the top 10, top 15. He ended up getting 7th, and then Tyler Reddick, we've talked about his day today. Yeah, he ends up finishing in the 30s, but a career high in laps led in 174, wins stage 2, so obviously that's a playoff point, and that's something you can already take away from the day. The race pace was there today, and it looked like Toyota was, again, just a really strong factor today, because a guy that was closing in on Brad Keselowski late was Ty Gibbs in 2nd. You thought maybe if there's a couple more laps, he might be able to get it. But another day where Ty Gibbs quietly just improving on this season.
Yeah, it just seems like, you hit the nail on the head. Ty Gibbs has slowly but surely just been getting finish after finish. Seems to really be growing into Cup. I mean, it shouldn't surprise anybody because he's had success in just about anything he's gotten in and had the opportunity to drive. But, I thought there was a chance because we were already kind of crowning Brad with 10 laps to go. We were like, oh my gosh, like Brad's going to win. And so I was like, I actually, like I said, I kind of I was watching this with my family. I was like, I don't know, guys. I was like, Ty Gibbs is running pretty good. And it just seemed like he was slowly but surely closing. Obviously, time ran out on him, but it seems inevitable that Ty Gibbs is going to end up in victory lane at some point this year.
This inevitable is coming. It is. It's just when, not if. But so you got 2 Stewart-Haas cars in the top 5. With Josh Berry and Chase Briscoe, who sounds like they might be safe at Stewart-Haas. We've got some YouTube videos on the whole fiasco at Stewart-Haas from this week that you should go check out. But I really want to give a shout out because we have been very pro Justin Haley on this podcast, but this is the very first Rick Ware top 10 on a non-drafting oval in NASCAR history. Justin Haley, P9. What a day. What a day, what a guy,
Yeah.
What a car.
Literally the best, not the best, but a good Ford, but a decent Ford. No, I gotta say, as far as Justin Haley, this is earth-shattering expectations. We've said it ad nauseum. I feels like every time we talk to him, we sat and scratched our heads when we heard he was going to go with Rick Ware Racing. It didn't make a ton of sense, but ultimately, this says way more about about Justin Haley, because he's elevated an absolute bottom feeder team to the point of where they're now in the top 10 at Darlington. And, I've said it twice on this podcast, may as well strike out and say it again. This is a track where drivers show through. You have to have skill to get around this place. And for Justin Haley to get a top 10 in this race in a Rick Ware Racing car, that's huge. I think we can't understate it enough. This is massive for them.
It's huge, and it also shows they're aligned with RFK. They have a technical alliance, and I don't think it's too far to say that the RFK speed today probably trickled down to Rick Ware a little bit. I'm not saying that they're going to be contending for wins, but it's not totally shocking to see them run in the top 20. Top 10, that's a huge win today, but I'm not shocked at all to see them in the top 20 when RFK nailed the setup today. You got to think that Rick Ware probably had something a little bit similar as far as equipment for them today.
Yeah, 100%. I like you said, with the technical alliance, when you're right, you're right. And it just felt like whoever did the setups for RFK were correct, and like you said, trickled down into Rick Ware Racing, and it's just cool, man. I mean, you wanted parity. This is exactly what NASCAR wanted with the next gen car. You wanted parity. You wanted the idea that anybody could finish anywhere just about any given day of the week, and that's what you got today. And just very cool to see. Bob, I am going to transition, because if there were ever a week where it were important for Alex Bowman to put together a decent showing, it was this week. Because with the 48 in the classic Jimmy Johnson scheme with Ally on the car, if he would have ran anywhere outside of the top 10, he may have been crucified online for desecrating the memory of Jimmy Johnson. Ultimately, he comes through and gets an 8th place finish today. I'm not going to lie. There was a big part of me that was very, very nervous for Alex Bowman this week, because as soon as I saw that scheme, I was like, is that the guy you really want to be putting in that 48 car looking like that? But hey, sure enough, he proved me wrong.
Yeah, I think that Bowman has definitely had a good string of runs the last month. He's running better than what we had kind of when we pressed the panic button or halfway through the season, or halfway through the start of this season, about 6 races in. Bowman's definitely trended in the right direction. Obviously, he's not on the same level as his teammates who are right now championship favorites with Byron and Larson. But yeah, I think that he's definitely getting closer into that Chase Elliott range where they're competing to be in top 10 ranges every week. There's no excuses to not be. But I will say this, for all the throwbacks Hendrick had, I loved the one that Bowman was running, and I didn't really see that on TV that much. And for such an iconic scheme, they kept showing the Byron one. They kept showing Elliott. They kept showing Larson, of course. But for such an iconic one with Jimmy Johnson, I was just kind of surprised they never really focused more on it there.
I'm telling you, dude, I think there was part of them that just were staying away from it. And just in case, I don't know. You're right. It was very weird that we didn't see more of that scheme, that it didn't get more attention. It was kind of like, it was kind of like the 8 that hangs out with 10s. I mean, yeah, she's attractive, but boy, oh boy, you got to get through just an absolute army of attractive women to look at her. And it's a great scheme. I just got to say it. We got to tip your cap to Hendrick. All 4 cars were great. You mentioned trending in the right direction, and I think if we were to write a theme for everybody who finished 11th to 15th in this race, that may be it. Trending in the right direction. Ross Chastain, Chase Elliott, Christopher Bell, Noah Gragson, Todd Gilliland. All 5 guys who seem to be trending in the right direction may have not had a ton of success early in the year, but, I think especially Ross Chastain, it's got to feel good for him to be up around the top 10. It just feels like we haven't really been talking about Ross a whole ton this year. So to him to even have a little bit of success, it just seems to be trending in the right direction.
No, I agree wholeheartedly there, especially when you look at Ross Chastain's teammate. Daniel Suarez is fighting to stay on the lead lap, it feels like half the time there. For at least Ross, he's fighting out these results, and you saw him at least run strong to start the week last week at Kansas. Kind of faded into the pack there a little bit. But yeah, just building on that for Trackhouse. Let's see if Ross Chastain can get into the victory lane, because he did on the Truck Series on Friday night. Kind of stole that win from Ford there. And was eating watermelon in victory. And that was a great sight to see. But overall, for this weekend in NASCAR, they tote this, they've given Darlington back a second date in the spring, and they call this the throwback weekend. It's on Mother's Day now. NASCAR racing on Easter and Mother's Day, that would have been a sin 15 years ago. But here we are. And honestly, today just felt like it was branded a throwback race. And it felt like the on-track action was a throwback race where it was a lot of green flag action. You didn't have just the beating and banging and chaos that you've kind of seen the last 20 years of NASCAR. It was a lot of green flag cycles. But man, when they did get the action and you had confrontations on pit road, today just felt like, a 1985 race at Darlington with some next gen cars. Am I way off base here? Is this pretty fair to say?
No, I think the only thing missing from today's race was the fresh layer of asphalt that they used to put on the track the night before, and that gave it the moniker, the Lady in Black. But other than that, you're 100% right, Bob. I think I am very guilty of maybe not paying as much attention to stage 1 as I do to stage 3. I'll say that right now. But today there was none of it. From the very moment the green flag dropped, it just seemed like there was something happening on the track. It was very much a throwback in that way. You had to pay attention to everything that was going on because you never knew when something consequential was going to happen. And Darlington there's something about this track that I just love. It creates conflict. The way that these guys have to go around, and the pit lane's a little bit weird. It used to be double-sided. Now it's not. It just, there's so much about Darlington that you just absolutely have to love. And you're right. It felt like, from an entertainment level, this was a throwback race. I thought it was one of the more, to have this and Kansas back-to-back, as a NASCAR fan, I'm smiling from ear to ear because this was easily one of the more interesting Darlington races we've had in a very long time, and probably one of the most interesting races in NASCAR, period, that we've had in a pretty long time. I just can't say enough good things about this, and you're right, it does feel like a little bit of a throwback because from the schemes to just how the race played out with all the green flag stops and everything, it was must-watch television.
Yeah, and you look at last week with Kansas, and it's, the cookie cutter, new age, oval, newer market, going to Kansas City, and something NASCAR's, fairly newer in the last 20 years or so. And the racing was incredible. And then you come and do an opposite. And you go to what I think, when you think of NASCAR, I think of Darlington, where it's old school. It's in South Carolina. It's that highline banked racing where it's driver attrition and it's a war of just surviving. And from racing at Kansas to going to something like this, and the car still does what it's supposed to in a very different style. It's not, a photo finish there, but you can appreciate a different style, and it was still entertaining because you still got it. Like I said, that 30-lap sprint to the finish with 3 cars there. I thought it was just, as a viewer it was different than last week, but it's going to keep that momentum as a fan of, I got to see what happens next week at North Wilkesboro. And that is all you can ask for NASCAR right now.
Yeah, and that you transitioned to it well for me because I am terrified of what's going to happen next week at North Wilkesboro because we are on such an emotional high. And the last thing I think any NASCAR fan wants to say, whether or not you're willing to say it out loud, is I do not want to see another short track. I do not want to see a short track follow these two races up.
It's not for points. It's okay. It's okay.
No, it is not okay because we need more horsepower. I understand we're going to run 2 different tire compounds. I'm excited to see what that entails, but I'm just going to say it. I have been holding on to the edge of my seat watching these past 2 races, and the idea that we are going to a short track to follow both of these 2 up, it terrifies me. And I may, I don't know what I'm going to do this week. I'm probably not going to have nails because I'm going to be so nervous all week about what NASCAR is going to do. I'm going to be chewing them off. But
hey, just think, Kevin Harvick's going to be in the car for practice. It's going to be nice. We're going to get some cool throwbacks. We're going to get the pit crew competition. It's going to be a fun little weekend where you can kind of take off the, what does the next gen car look like here? Is it going to be interesting to see maybe Kyle Larson absolutely dog lap the field again? I don't know. I don't want to say yes or no. But again, we're back in North Wilkesboro. Take it with a grain of salt. This isn't what NASCAR is going to look like the whole year. But I know I totally get the concerns. But at the end of the day, It may not be your fault. It may not be your fault, but it is your problem at the end of the day.
I was just gonna say, Bob, it is interesting because we were a week away from the pit crew really getting their time to shine with the pit crew, competition. And then Fox threw us a little bit of a curveball because they introduced us to Houston Stamper, Tyler Reddick's front tire changer, who absolutely saved Tyler Reddick's race, to be honest with you, with the way that he was able to get the hose out from underneath the car, to prevent the hang up and to get him out on time. A heck of a move. That was good. What was great was the fact that Fox had the chance to interview him after, to where he gave us the quote that we have been saying since the very intro. It is not your fault, but it is your problem. I mean, this chef's kiss, just a golden quote.
That
Bob.
feels like some kind of beautiful Gary Buseyism, and I am here for it. I'm going to be saying that for the rest of my life. But no, Ad, two things that you can really take away with this. The first one is he's an absolute star, and I need more interviews with him after the pit road sequences. But two, for as much as we pile on Fox, and for as much as warranted, credit where credit's due, a big moment like that at the beginning of stage 3 in the pit cycles there, where Tyler Reddick has a moment where his whole race could have been derailed, and instead a heads-up moment by the changer there, rips the gun out from under the car and is able to save the day. And then Fox has the wherewithal to interview him immediately after and capture what had happened in that. And I want to see everyone involved, because at the end of the day, the drivers are the ones that get the credit, but the crew chiefs are the ones calling the race strategy. The pit crews are the one making sure they have the race position out there and the track position. And when something goes wrong, we're always going to highlight, oh, well, the Jackman, he let it slip too early. Or, oh, the changer missed a lug nut. So when somebody like him has a moment and saves the race, I want to see them rewarded for that and get the praise. So that was really cool from Fox. I love that little wrinkle.
No, it's so funny because as two former linemen turned podcast co-hosts, I think, the offensive linemen in football don't necessarily get any shine unless they do something wrong. And the pit crews in NASCAR are very similar, to where we're not going to necessarily talk about a tire changer unless he drops a tire, or he's over the wall too soon, or, a lug nut's loose. I mean, that's usually the time where we get to hear from or, really focus on the pit crew. So we got to tip our caps. I mean, for Fox to go over there and to give this guy the opportunity to give us the quote of the decade, I loved it. It was really cool. And, that wasn't even the coolest thing I think that they did all day. The stripe counter. I mean, probably my favorite thing since Digger. I mean, I'm just going to say it. It was very fun. I'm very excited. It was cool to see the stripe count and for them to constantly show the wall. It just, they're highlighting what is unique about the sport and was what is unique about Darlington, which is what I think you need more of in the sport. So yeah, we are critical of Fox often on this podcast, as we should be. I think sometimes they do mess things up, but we do have to tip our caps today because they did a very good job of covering
100%. And overall, as a NASCAR fan, you've got to be excited in the direction where you're heading, because this is now 2 weeks in a row, and really, outside the short track and this whole aero blocking stuff we've debated null and void here, it's been a great season, and the personalities are showing in NASCAR. We've got storylines, we've got a battle between Hendrick and Gibbs that's highlighting in the championship, and then you've got all these different other things that are going on each week, and now you throw in cool wrinkles like this where you get to see all the different personalities on each team from top to bottom and learn about what it takes to be completely successful in this sport. And like you said, Ad, when we pile on Fox, we got to give credit where credit's due. So for them, well done to Fox, and overall for NASCAR at Darlington, top to bottom for a throwback weekend. I got to say, this was probably a very successful weekend on the books.
I'll say this, my favorite throwback scheme of the week didn't come on the track. It was in the form of Mike Joy wearing his Speed Channel shirt in the broadcast. So that was my favorite throwback scheme. But Bob, now that we've kind of gotten to this part of the podcast, we're getting ready to wrap up. Of all of the great throwback schemes, what was your favorite one on the track?
I mean, the Terry Labonte one's such an easy answer, but I love the Carson host of our cop car one. I always think that's a pretty cool one there as well. But just there's something about that iconic lettering in the bush light for Ross Chastain in the mountains. I love that scheme. It just pops when you see it on the track. That was one of my favorites there. I loved it. And then, of course, Alex Bowman just didn't get the love it needed, but I thought that they really nailed that design.
Yeah, I think for me, anytime you see any sort of remnants of the Rainbow Warrior car, I love the 24. That classic 24 look, it's not, you can't even necessarily say it's a super throwback look, because the 24 hasn't really strayed too far from that type of look, especially with the sponsor. But that was awesome. I think obviously going outside of Hendrick, I thought, the best thing Austin Dillon did on the track was drive that car, because it was beautiful, that gold. And it was cool. I love the idea of the throwback weekend. What I will say is I have a bone to pick with JGR, because you're one of NASCAR's biggest teams. Everybody decided that we're going to do a throwback weekend. We're going to make this, and you didn't do it. You just didn't show up. You were too cool to turn your assignment in. You didn't do any of the throwback schemes. As a sport, if we're going to commit to doing something and making it, oh, hey, this is our throwback weekend, you can't have one of your main teams, one of your biggest teams, one of your, most successful teams in the sport just not show up and do anything for it. I mean, you could make an argument that Bell did something with the DeWalt scheme, but I don't know. It just rubbed me the wrong way that everybody else seems to be committing to this, and for whatever reason, JGR was just like, no, we're good. We're too cool for this.
Adam and Kevin Harvick both have old man rants about the JGR throwback schemes. There you go, folks. If you stayed around this long, you got a nice little rant there from Adam to end out the show. As always, if you've made it this far, be a friend, tell a friend, like, subscribe, comment, share this. We cover NASCAR on a daily basis here, whether it's Spotify or our YouTube. We put out stuff weekly as far as NASCAR news. So, of course, whether it's shorts or news clips, we've got stuff for you on all assets of the NASCAR YouTube as well. So, yeah, give us a follow there. And as always, it's been Darlington week, the Lady in Black. It was a lovely week to be a throwback scheme in NASCAR.
Breaking Balls rules, and if you have anything otherwise to say, please don't comment on our videos, because it very much hurts my feelings.
Especially on Mother's Day. My mom might read the comments, so let's give her that. Let's give her the gift of Mother's Day of some positive comments, okay, folks? Positive comments. Breaking Balls, episode 72. Happy Mother's Day.